When you think about the stuff you use every day, you probably don't think about its backstory. But sometimes the journey a product takes to get to you is anything but simple. It can get tangled up in these really difficult choices, where just trying to do the right thing, well, it can have consequences that absolutely nobody saw coming. Let's pull on one of those threads.
Our story kicks off with something pretty much everyone recognizes, a soccer ball. But where it comes from, that might surprise you. We're heading to a city in northeast Pakistan called Sialkot, a place that has a really, really special relationship with the world's favorite game. Just take a look at this. This is the heart and soul of the industry right here. Over 80% of the soccer balls from this region are stitched by hand. And it is a painstaking process. We're talking 690 stitches for just one ball. But that's what makes them so durable, so aerodynamic, the kind the pros use. Now, here's the part that's kind of mind-blowing. The sheer scale of it all. A staggering 70%, 70, of all the soccer balls in the entire world come from this one city. That's just an incredible amount of a global industry concentrated in one spot. Okay, but this is where the picture starts to get a little more complicated. For each ball, a process that takes about 3 hours of skilled work, the stitcher, who is almost always a woman, gets paid around 60 cents. So, do the math. That works out to a monthly income of roughly $35. And just to give you some context, the local minimum wage is a lot higher than that, and what you call a living wage is even higher still. This is the daily reality for thousands and thousands of workers. So you've got this huge global brand, you've got incredibly low wages, and there are reports of child labor. It seems like a pretty clear-cut problem to fix, doesn't it? Well, let's see what happened when one of the biggest companies on the planet, Nike, decided to step in and do just that. So, on the surface, Nike did everything by the book. They set up a code of conduct for their suppliers. Then they found out one of them, a company called Saga Sports, was using child labor by farming work out to these smaller, uninspected workshops. Nike asked them again and again to fix the problem, and when they didn't, Nike did what seems like the only ethical thing to do. In 2007, they terminated the contract.
Seems obvious, yeah? They stood up to a supplier using child labor. They enforced their own rules. A clear win for ethical business practices. But what actually happened on the ground back in Sialkot?
The result wasn't a victory parade. It was an absolute economic disaster for the community. Just pulling that one contract meant about 8,000 people lost their jobs. Gone. And this is where the story just becomes completely heartbreaking. Because there were these unverified reports that some of the very same children Nike's policy was designed to protect were now left with zero income, and they were forced into even more desperate situations to survive. An action that was meant to help ended up making things so much worse. This whole story with Nike in Pakistan is a perfect, if painful, example of a really complex idea that businesses run into all the time. It's one of those situations where there are no good answers, and every single option has a serious downside. And there's a name for this. It's called an ethical dilemma. See, this isn't a choice between a right answer and a wrong answer. It's a choice between two things that both feel wrong. For Nike, it was, what? Tolerate child labor in your supply chain, or fire thousands of people and maybe push those same kids into something even worse. There was just no clean, morally perfect way out. And trust me, this isn't just about soccer balls. These kinds of dilemmas, they pop up everywhere in global business. You see them in questions about employment, about human rights, about different environmental rules, and really just about the basic moral obligations of a company. Now, it is really important to understand what an ethical dilemma is not. A tough choice between two bad options is one thing, but just outright cheating, that's something else entirely. Let's look at a different case to make that line crystal clear. So it all boils down to one word: intent. On the left, you've got Nike. They were actively trying to do the right thing and enforce a code of conduct, but it backfired with these awful, unintended consequences. Then on the right, you have the Volkswagen emissions gate scandal. VW wasn't wrestling with a tough moral choice. They were literally programming their cars to lie. Get this, their cars had software that knew when it was in a lab being tested. It would turn on all the emissions controls and pass with flying colors.
But the second it was out on the actual road, those controls shut off, and the cars pumped out up to 40 times the legal limit of pollutants. See, that's not a dilemma. That's a deliberate, calculated deception.
Okay, so we've seen a real dilemma and a clear-cut case of deception. Now let's look at something that evolved over time, a case that forced companies to really decide what their role was in a huge systemic injustice, the fight against apartheid in South Africa.
This was the massive question everyone was facing. On the one hand, if you do business there, are you propping up this deeply unjust system? But on the other hand, if you leave, people lose their jobs, and you lose any chance you might have to push for positive change from the inside. It's another classic, messy dilemma.
And the way companies handled this really changed over the years. At first, in the late 70s, the thinking of, let's stay and fight from within. Companies like GM adopted what were called the Sullivan Principles, basically a promise to treat all their employees equally and resist apartheid inside their own company walls. But by the mid-80s, even the guy who wrote those principles said, look, this isn't enough. It's not working fast enough. That's when the whole strategy shifted. Big companies, we're talking GM, IBM, Xerox, they started pulling out completely. And that sent this massive shockwave, both economically and symbolically, that helped lead to the end of apartheid.
So, from a soccer ball in Pakistan to a car in Germany to a historic fight for freedom in South Africa, we've seen that when it comes to global business, things are almost never just black and white. And what this all boils down to is a really fundamental tension. Do you just focus on the immediate effect of your decision, like stop child labor? Or do you have to think about the second and third effects? What happens to those kids and their families after those jobs are gone? Figuring that out, that is the real challenge.
Which, of course, leaves us with the biggest question of all. When every single choice has a cost, when any action can ripple out in ways you never intended, what does doing the right thing even mean? It kind of makes you think. The next time you pick something up, it's worth asking not just how much did this cost, but also what was the cost of trying to do good?